Hey everyone. Not sure why you can't see me. It's really strange. Let me try this. Okay. Hey guys. So I thought for today, instead of me going through a bunch of notes and you guys, jotting them down live, that I would pre-record them and put them up so that you guys can interact with them in a little bit of a different way. And so through this, there'll be a few different videos and things like that. Um, that I will show through this and interact with you guys kind of in this format. So we're going to go through and talk about Somalia and see what are some different aspects of the country and what are some different kind of different ways to look at the history of Somalia, what's happened to it, and kind of what's going on today. So the first aspect we're going to look at is religion. So religion in Somalia is very much kind of mostly one religion. So because of the geography of Somalia, which we looked at last time, it's very close to the Arabian Peninsula, which is where Islam started in Saudi Arabia. So because of that, Islam actually spread really, really early to Somalia, and as a result of that, it was introduced in the 7th century, the 600s, which is really the century when Islam started, and it has a huge impact on the culture and society of Somalia. So most people don't necessarily think when they think of Africa, they don't necessarily think of Islam, but a lot of, especially North Africa, is, and then Somalia and some other eastern coastal African countries are also heavily Muslim. So how heavily are we talking about? So 99.8% of the population of Somalia is Muslim. So that is a huge percentage. Nearly all are Sunni. There's a breakdown in Islam between Sunni and Shia, which are two kind of branches of Islam. And most countries have a majority of one or the other. Almost all Muslims in Somalia are Sunni Muslims. It is the official state religion, meaning the government and the religion are just intertwined, very different from what we have in America. And laws of the country are not allowed to conflict with what's called Sharia law. Sharia law is a law system based on the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam, that has laws that are either explicitly in the Quran or laws that make sure they don't go against or conflict with anything in the holy book. So, like I said, religion, government really intertwined in Somalia. And this map shows actually what I was referring to before, which is the religious breakdown in Africa as a whole. So you've got these green countries, the green areas at least, are heavily Muslim, majority Muslim. So you see Somalia is almost completely Muslim. And then North Africa, the reason why this is light green is because it's mostly desert. It's the Sahara, except for this little dark green here, which maybe some of you can guess what that is. But that's the Nile River and the kind of larger population that lives on the coasts of the Nile River, because you're able to plant crops and things like that. And then the yellow is Christian. And the red, which makes sense, are areas where there's religious conflict. And I say it makes sense because you've got yellow and you've got green kind of butting up against each other. And so in a lot of these Central African countries, you've got major religious conflict between Muslims and Christians. So back to Somalia. I think this political cartoon kind of sums up at least what we've seen so far. Do you hate taxes, hate government, hate regulations, love guns? It's better in Somalia. Obviously that's an oversimplification of political views, but that's kind of the reality in Somalia in a lot of ways, especially in the article we looked at last time. So I'm going to quickly go through a timeline of Somalia's government just to get a brief overview. So in 1960, what had been Italian and British Somaliland became an independent country called the United Republic of Somalia. So they broke away from their colonial rule and became an independent country. And in 1969, this guy, there's going to be a lot of Mohammeds. Okay, so try to keep track. This guy, his name is Mohammed Syed Barre. He took over as president in a military coup, which means that basically the military forced the previous president out of power, and this guy, who was part of the military, a military leader, put himself in as the president. And from 1970 to 1991, Mohammed Syed Barre, he ruled Somalia as a socialist state. So when he took over, he implemented socialist policies and really like extreme suppression in a lot of ways. So only one political party was legal, his political party. And then, there's a lot of issues we're not going to get into, but a lot of restrictions and a lot of, suppressing of political opponents and a lot of issues. So in 1991, Syed Barre was ousted, meaning he was forced out of power, and that led to a civil war, which lasted for a really long time. Just think about this question for a second. If the U.S. government vanished overnight, fast forward 10 years, like imagine that. Imagine you woke up today. There was no government, local, state, federal, it's gone. And then our country stays in that state for 10 years. Imagine what that would look like in 2031, let's say now. Probably what you'd have is chaos. You probably have people who banded together to protect themselves from all the other dangerous people. You probably have little local clans that have kind of gathered together to protect themselves and keep themselves safe. You'd probably have a lot of crime, obviously. You'd have a lot of violence. And so in a country like the United States, where we're used to having a certain level of government, even here, I think we could easily see it ending up in a really bad place. And that's exactly what happens in Somalia when there's civil war that breaks out and there's basically no government for an extended period of time. What you see is what we saw in that article. So from 91 to 2001, there was no official government. And they were just in the midst of this civil war with nobody in charge. So the lands were basically completely up for grabs. So warlords who are a local military leader who has control over a particular region, they came in, they took claim of the land, and they just set themselves up and their group up as basically the government of that land. It'd be like, imagine if there was no government, somebody might come in and say, look, South Brunswick is mine. Okay. And the reason that I can claim it's mine is because I have the weapons, I have the troops, and I have people who will defend it. And so you can either be with me and be with my South Brunswick clan, or you can go somewhere else and not have protection, or, maybe worse. So that's kind of how Somalia was ruled for an extended period of time. And in 2004 to 2012, there were a couple transitional governments, meaning they were trying to transition from no government to a permanent government. One of the problems with these governments is that they didn't even operate inside the country. They were actually operating out of Kenya, which borders Somalia to the west. So it's kind of hard to imagine a government having a lot of control when it's not actually located in the country. So that's an issue. And another issue is that it wasn't effective because the regional clans that are controlled by these warlords had more power than the government, because they had the guns, they had the troops, they had the people willing to buy into what they were doing. And so they refused to accept the government. And without the clans, you either have to have those regional clans accept the government and give up their power, or you have to have a strong enough military to be willing to fight those clans and take the country back. So neither of those things was happening, and therefore these transitional governments have not really been successful, at least up through 2012. 2012 to present, though, so this is after what we read in the article. The article was from 2008, that lawless land article. So from 2012 up to today, there has been a permanent government that actually has been set up inside Somalia. So that's a good first step. It's been officially recognized by the United States and a bunch of other nations. This was the first president under that under that government. His name was Hassan Sheikh Mohammed. And then he was president up until 2017. And then this is actually a different person, okay, believe it or not, even though they look almost identical. This guy is Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed, whose nickname is Mr. Cheese, which I'll talk about that in a second. But he is the current government of Somalia, elected in 2017. We'll come back to Mr. Cheese later on. Okay, so what is life like in Somalia on a day-to-day basis? So there's about 10 to 12 million people who live in Somalia. The official language is a language known as Somali, but Italian, Arabic, and English are often spoken. So Italian and English because of their colonial roots, and then Arabic because of the high Muslim population. Economically, one of the poorest nations in the world. Their GDP per capita is $400. Just by point of comparison, the U.S. is $55,800. So that's a huge, huge difference. 71% of the economy is based on agriculture, which we saw in those stats that you guys looked at the other day, which means that they don't have a lot of other industries that you can go into in Somalia, not a lot of advanced technology. Prior to 1991, when it was a socialist state, there was actually free education, which is one aspect of socialism. That's kind of a positive. There was free education, high literacy rates. But after 1991, only about 8% of school-age children are in school today. Only 8%, which is kind of crazy. And the literacy rate, which is people at the age of 15 or above that can read and write, for men, it's a little less than 50%, and for women, it's about 25%. So at best, 50% of men in Somalia can read and write, which presents lots of problems if you're trying to get your country out of some of these issues. If you're trying to get a new government, if you're trying to get more investment in the economy, if you don't have an educated population, that makes it very difficult. And what it could lead to is just the elites, people who are educated and wealthy, taking control, which is also not a great, not the most ideal situation. Okay, another huge problem in the country is cot, and we're gonna watch this video together, and gonna have you pick out a couple things as we go. So just be thinking about what is the effect and impact of cot, which is a drug, on Somalia.
Eight million Somali survive in a perennial state of destitution, receiving little humanitarian aid, and only for the lucky ones, money transferred from relatives working abroad. But there is yet another terrible evil afflicting the Somali: khat, a mass-consumed drug, which in Somalia is sold in broad daylight. Every night, in a region 100 kilometers from Nairobi, thousands of khat cultivators harvest the product, which is then sent to the airport of the Kenyan capital and loaded onto aircraft, to the total indifference of the local authorities. Khat is also what fuels the inexhaustible Somali conflict. Earnings from trafficking this drug are huge, estimated at $1 billion a year. The police, the army, and the clan chiefs share the goods like good friends with the local mafia man. According to international organizations, khat is consumed in Somalia by 50% of the adult population. Sometimes children are deprived of every means of sustenance by adults who are dependent on the drug. Khat costs $2 to $3 for a daily dose. In other words, the entire salary of an average worker. Every day at 4 in the afternoon, the mass consumption of khat begins. This daily ritual continues well into the dead of night. Hour after hour, millions of Somali chew khat leaves to drive away reality.
Okay, so I think that last statement is really important, that one of the causes of this huge drug problem in Somalia is the difficult reality of day-to-day life there. And so it's a means of escape for Somalis. It's a means of, at least for a few hours, kind of forgetting the problems that exist. So obviously khat is a huge issue. It's also not really regulated. It's not illegal. It's just kind of an accepted part of life there. Okay, gonna quickly talk about a really important event in Somalia, which has come to be known as Black Hawk Down. Some of you may have heard of this. There was a movie that came out a long time ago now, but is maybe still popular or still well known, called Black Hawk Down. And so this is where Somalia and the U.S. kind of start to connect. So a little bit of background. From 1990 to 1992, there was a civil war. Well, the civil war was going on. It started in 91. And a really severe famine at the same time. So there were thousands of people who were starving in Somalia, hundreds of thousands of people. And so this led the United Nations to send food to Somalia in something called Operation Provide Relief. So that was the UN mission to send food. So during that time, when they were, you can see in the picture here, they're putting together shipments of rice and all kinds of different stuff, sending it over to Somalia and dropping it on the coast. 80% of it was stolen by the local warlords who controlled these different areas. So they would steal the food, and then they would keep it as a stockpile and only give it to certain people for if they paid them, or give it to people as incentive to do things that they wanted. And during that time, 300,000 Somalis died of starvation, even though the UN was supplying this food, because it was stolen by these warlords. So obviously something had to be done about that. So in late 92 to early 1993, the United States decides to intervene and to offer to send in 25,000 troops, along with the aid, to make sure that Somalis get the food. And that was called Operation Restore Hope. And the U.S. really didn't have any other interest in Somalia besides a humanitarian interest, meaning they were doing this just so that this drought, this famine would end and Somalis would get the food that they needed. So June to October of 93, so it works pretty well during late 92, early 93, it's going well. The U.S. decided to give full control back to the UN, and they only leave about 1,200 U.S. troops. And those 1,200 troops are mostly special forces that are tasked with capturing warlords in Mogadishu, which is the capital again. So what they're trying to do is actually get to the root of the problem and actually take out these warlords. And this is what leads us to this event that's known as Black Hawk Down. So in October of 1993, the U.S. military sent in Rangers and what was the special force called the Delta Force into Mogadishu to capture a warlord. And the name of this operation was pretty cool, which is Operation Gothic Serpent. Awesome name. And the entire operation was supposed to take 30 minutes. They're supposed to go in. They're supposed to get. It was actually his lieutenants, but the target event really who they were targeting was this guy Mohammed Farah Aidid. He's this warlord of Mogadishu. And so he and his lieutenants were the target. They're supposed to go take his lieutenants. It was supposed to be like the convoy of vehicles were to come in, get to this building, take out the lieutenants, drive off. Black Hawk helicopters would be covering them the whole time, 30 minutes, boom. Not how it ended up at all. So I'm going to skip this video, but you can feel free to look up clips. What actually happened was that Somalis were heavily armed. The time of the operation was right when the height of the cot consumption is happening in the day for Somalis, which is it makes you jumpy. And so they were trigger happy, and they thought the Somalis would be on their side. They thought if anything went down, the average Somali would see Americans as helpers, saviors, that Farah Aidid would be the enemy. And that's not how Somalis saw the situation. Most Somalis had kind of been taught by Aidid and others that Americans were the enemy, that they were this colonizing force that were coming into Somalia, that they didn't have their best interests at heart. And so throughout this operation, 18 U.S. soldiers were killed, 78 were wounded, 2 Black Hawk helicopters were shot down. This was the first time that had happened since the Vietnam War, like 20 years earlier. An American pilot was captured and held for 11 days. There were videos of him in captivity by Somalis. There's videos that come out the next day of bodies of American soldiers being dragged through the streets, of Somalis jumping up and down in celebration of this, and people woke up the next day and turned on their TVs, and that's what they saw: dead American soldiers in Somalia. I don't think this link works anymore, but so just imagine that you're an American. You wake up, and that's the images you see on your TV. Dead American soldiers in Somalia. This is the pilot who was captured. So this is the question that people start to ask: what in the world are we doing? Why are we in Somalia? Why are we in this country? I thought we were just there to help them with this famine, and how am I waking up and seeing 18 U.S. soldiers dead, bodies of Americans dragged through the streets, helicopters shot down? So there's a big call to get out, to say, you know what, we tried to help in Somalia, but it's not worth losing our soldiers to help people that clearly, from the videos, don't want to be helped. So by the spring of 95, all troops are gone. Aidid was actually killed in Somalia in August of 95. But the important thing here is that this leads the United States to be very hesitant to get involved in future events in Africa. And we're going to see this play out in Rwanda just a couple months after Black Hawk Down. The Rwandan genocide breaks out, and the U.S. stays out of it. And this is a big part of why they were kind of afraid of another Somalia. Going to skip these videos for the sake of time. Okay, terrorism in Somalia is another major topic. I'm just going to quickly go through this. Al-Shabaab is a militant Islamic terrorist group that operates inside of Somalia. Al-Shabaab means the youth, and it was started in 2003. It has roughly 8,000 members, and one of the reasons that it's grown in Somalia is that they basically promised to provide security for people early on when the civil war was going on, when there was no government. But during 2011, there was another famine, and there was Western aid that was being sent into Somalia, and Al-Shabaab rejected that aid, which lost them a lot of credibility and goodwill with people in Somalia. So in 2008, they took over most of Somalia. In 2012, they pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda, which is the group that carried out 9/11, Osama bin Laden's terrorist group. In 2013, they attacked a shopping mall in Nairobi, Kenya, which was kind of a famous event. In 2015, they massacred a bunch of Christian students at a university in Kenya. And so Al-Shabaab is a group that you'll probably hear about if you hear about Kenya. All right, last major topic here is the topic of pirates. Okay, so some of you have probably heard of Somali pirates, or maybe watched the movie Captain Phillips that deals with Somali pirates, which I would highly recommend. It's a very good movie. Um, so here's a quote just to set up the discussion. It says, "The really disturbing thing about Somalia is that in a country where there are few economic opportunities, pirates are perceived as glamorous and are held in awe by young boys who aspire to their lifestyle." Okay, so think about, with a lack of opportunity or anything, it makes sense, honestly, that people would look up to these pirates. We'll see what they kind of do. So how did piracy start in Somalia? So just a little bit of background. Many Somalis are fishermen by trade. And if you look at the geography of Somalia, it makes sense. There's about 2,000 miles of coastline in Somalia, so you'd imagine that there's lots of good fishing and it's an easy way to make a living. But what starts to happen is that because Somalia doesn't have a functioning government for a long time, there are other people who are coming in and fishing the waters off of the coast of Somalia. There are particular international laws of who's allowed to fish in what area, but because there's no government to enforce those laws in Somalia, other people are coming in and fishing their areas. Also, companies are just dumping toxic waste off the coast of Somalia because, again, who's going to stop them? And so that started to destroy the livelihood of many Somalis. About $300 million worth of seafood is stolen from Somali waters each year. And in a country where the GDP is $400, per person, however you break that down, that's a huge amount. $300 million is a huge part of the economy. So what they started to do was to band together and defend their waters from illegal fishing. So they would go out in these boats and bring their AK-47s, and they would try to prevent people from fishing in their waters or dumping waste. Eventually, this leads to the guys in these little motorboats boarding the ships and holding crews hostage, because these ships, these big shipping container things, they don't have defense systems for the most part. They might now, but a lot of all they had to defend themselves with were these fire hoses. They didn't have guns. They didn't have security. So what companies decided to start doing was paying to keep these illegal activities under wraps, because they might be dumping toxic waste or in waters that they're not supposed to be in. So instead of actually owning up to that, they would just quietly pay the pirates to get their crews back to safety and go on their way, which encouraged more piracy. So this actually became more lucrative than fishing was. So instead of going back to fishing once they defended their waters, they said, you know what, this piracy thing is actually making me a lot more money. So this is when non-fishermen start to get in on it. Anything that makes money, you have people flocking to it, right? So now there are crews that are set up, and there's warlords who are, organizing these things. And now it's a pretty sophisticated, well-run operation. So in the height of their activity, which was about 10 years ago, in 2010, they hijacked 49 ships and took over 1,000 hostages just in 2010 alone. And over the last 5 years, there's been a relative decline, but then kind of in the last couple years, there's been an increase again in these attacks. So again, this map kind of shows, like, this is where it started, and then this is where it started to expand out to, and then there have been attacks as far south as down all the way down here by Madagascar, and as far north as, we're almost up into I don't know what country that would be, but like near India over here. For the sake of time, I'm not going to watch these, but I'll put them on the assignment, because I think they're really this is from Captain Phillips, and these clips show what a pirate attack looks like in a movie perspective. I will show you this clip. This is from 2017, and it's real footage. This is like GoPro footage from a private security crew that was hired by one of these shipping companies to protect them. So this is an actual pirate attack. You'll see them approaching in these little like dinghy motorboat with and the most of the Somali pirates have like AK-47s, and you'll see them defending the ship.
go, Pat. Where's he at? He's all the way out! All the way out!
All right, I'm going to pause it there. But yeah, so typically what would happen is they would come up in these boats. They have ladders with them that they hook onto the side of the ship and then climb up. It's much harder if companies have these private security crews. I'm going to skip this. Okay, so the last thing is their hope for Somalia. So the new president was elected in 2017, and countries are recognizing the Somali government and they're supporting it. And so it is actually operating inside the country, like I said before, which is good. The United States is one of the countries that has recognized and supported the Somali government. This guy, Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed, I mentioned him before. His nickname is Mohammed Formaggio. Formaggio means cheese in Italian, and so I refer to him as Mr. Cheese, although his nickname is really like Mohammed Cheese. And he just really loves cheese. And I think his father was like a big, I think he was some kind of like importer of food and something like that, but he just loves cheese. And so he got that nickname, which I love. So he left Somalia in 1985 and went to the United States and got educated. He actually worked in local government in Buffalo, New York, and taught at a community college there. And then came back to Somalia in 2010 and was prime minister for about 8 months. There was a whole political issue with him, and he was forced out as prime minister. But during his time in office, he was really popular and widely respected. So in 2017, he runs for president. There have been some claims of issues with the election, of vote buying and things like that. One person called it the most expensive election in history, meaning that his party may have done a lot to get people to vote with financial incentive. However, he seems to be somebody that's got the best interests of Somalia at heart, and maybe who can make a change. So what I'm going to have you do for the last part here is, once I'm done talking and you're done doing this, is to read a short profile of Mr. Cheese and just make a T-chart. Reasons why he might succeed, reasons why he might fail, keeping in mind what we've talked about already and in this presentation and previous knowledge to make educated guesses and predictions. Okay, and that's all I have for you. So please go ahead and go to that. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment on the assignment, and we can talk about it next time. All right.